Greetings, greetings, greetings. This is Doc Ock coming at you live and direct. Doc Ock coming at you tonight. That's right. We getting ready to take flight over here, up in here, up in here. Just going over a few things, trying to make sure everything's on the up and up. Make sure everything is on the up and up. Yes, 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 and it's looking good right now. All right, I think we're ready to go now. Let's get the book. We'll be ready over here, ready over here, ready over there, ready everywhere. Now, let me remind y'all of what you need to do, like I need to remind you. First and foremost, give us a like. Second of all, go ahead and subscribe to the Tubular Black Facts channel. All right, and if you can do both of those things, we would greatly appreciate it because that'll help us out. And last but not least, don't forget to invite your family and your friends to come and see the great works that we're doing right over here. Absolutely. Now, we're moving on to our proverb for tonight. Let's see what we got for y'all tonight. Tonight. What do we have for you tonight? Let's see what we got here. We read this one here, didn't we? Yeah, we read Ukitaka Kula Nguruwe Kula Aliyenona. Aliyenona. And that is if you want to eat a pig, a whole pig, eat a fat one. So we did that one. I think we did that one last night. So we're going to do another one for tonight. Let's see what we got for tonight. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Right over here. This is a good one for right about now. Umoya ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. Umoya ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. So you hear me start off with umoya. So that's unity. Unity is strength. Disunity is weakness. Umoya ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. Yeah, there we go. Love these proverbs. These are some excellent proverbs. We've got some great proverbs in here, and we're passing them on to you. Now, these proverbs are for your use. They're not just to be sitting around, listening to me run them down. Pick them up and run with them. Yep, pick them up and run with them. I know I didn't type them out down there, but just listen to the sounds and follow the sound, the mellifluous sound of my voice. All right? See how that works for you. If it's not working, you let me know. I'll see if I can type it up, put it in the comment section or something. Maybe that's what I'll start doing. I just put them in the comment section, and we'll just do a running catalog of these proverbs, okay? One at a time. But in the meanwhile, I'll give you that one again. Umoya ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. Udhaifu. Huh? Yeah, do that. Unity is strength. All right, now let's see what's going on with Sister Ona Judge tonight. See what's going on with her. In the book, Never Caught, the story of Ona Judge, an enslaved African woman who escapes the clutches of George and Martha Washington, no less. The Gradual Abolition Act. Now, what's that about? Who ever heard of gradual abolition? Let's see what they're talking about. Ona was not the only enslaved person paying attention. 3 enslaved people claimed their freedom in Philadelphia on April 6, 1791. After they learned about Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act, their actions would have a direct effect on how Ona, Judge, and the other Washington slaves were treated by the president and his wife. The Gradual Abolition Act had been passed into law in 1780. Pennsylvania had taken the lead in anti-slavery legislation with the passage of this law, but it was complicated. Many Pennsylvanians felt as if they could not end slavery in one fell swoop, but instead needed to be very clear about the process by which the enslaved could claim their freedom. The law stated no one could import new slaves into Pennsylvania. Slave owners in Pennsylvania had to register their slaves at the local courthouse. If children were born to enslaved Pennsylvania mamas, their legal status would be indentured servant instead of slave. And they'd have to work for their mother's owner until the age of 28. Well, shoot, come on now. They taking the best years of the child's life. If an enslaved person was brought to Pennsylvania by a slave owner from another state, the enslaved person would be freed if they remained in Pennsylvania for longer than 6 months. And this is the key. That was the key one out of all of those. That one right there, that's the key. Slave owners who were members of Congress. There's always a catch to it. Slave owners who were members of Congress did not have to abide by this law. Okay? Yeah, they could do whatever they want. The 3 slaves who claimed their freedom were owned by another founding father of America. Although he wasn't as famous as George Washington, he had not believed that his slaves would be smart enough or aware enough to learn about the Gradual Abolition Act. He had also thought that they might have preferred, he thought they might have liked continuing to be slaves. He thought he treated his slaves so good that they'd prefer to keep walking behind his wife's carriage, because they weren't going to let him ride inside. Be for real. These Maryland slave owners, these Pennsylvania slave owners just need to be straight for real. But it sounds unbelievable today, but it was a justification for slavery that many slave owners believed in their heart of hearts at that time. In any event, the slave owner was caught completely off guard. He was just totally caught off guard when his slaves came home telling him, hey boss, guess what? I was free today. See you later. I just came back to get some of my stuff. I'm taking off. The most embarrassing part of the whole situation was that this slave owner was someone who should have known the laws backward and forward. His name was Edmund Randolph. Ooh, one of the Randolphs. I know them. I heard of them. And he was the chief lawyer or attorney general. He was the attorney general of the United States of America. Randolph was the guy to thank for the idea of a legislative branch of the federal government made up of 2 parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. He had been an aide to George Washington during the Revolutionary War. Later on, the governor of Virginia. In 1791, Randolph thought he could keep his slaves because he was a federal official. But he found out he was wrong. Yeah. Didn't know the law like he thought he knew the law. Not only that, he had badly underestimated his slaves. Now, you know that's something you don't want to do. Oh, let me go back. I back up. I skipped the part. Only members of Congress were allowed to keep their slaves. The act didn't say anything about federal officials. More importantly, he had underestimated them slaves, which is a major faux pas, and he had not realized that the allure of freedom just sitting there, dangling in front of him like a carrot on a stick, was so bright that enslaved people, helped out by the free black community in Philadelphia, would do anything they could to find their way to it. Randolph could do nothing to stop his slaves from leaving him. That was done. But he could stop a similar situation from happening to his friends, especially the president and his wife. He immediately visited the president's house, insisting that he talk to George. But the president was not in Philadelphia. He was in Virginia as part of his 3-month tour of the southern states. Randolph then asked to speak to Martha. For sure, Randolph had been at the president's house before on many occasions, and each time Ona was undoubtedly by Martha's side. This day would be different, though. The situation was delicate. Randolph may have explained, perhaps avoiding Ona's eyes. He needed to have a private conversation with Martha. Yeah, needed to talk in private. Thank you very much. Probably his eyes glanced quickly at Ona, and Martha immediately understood. She dismissed Ona from the room. Ona would have been curious, of course, since it was very rare for Martha to give her time alone, to give Ona time alone. Yet she would have obeyed. Maybe she went outside and took a deep breath of the fresh April air. Maybe she closed her eyes and imagined her mama, Betty, at Mount Vernon. Maybe she thought about the new black church that was forming just a few blocks away. Or maybe she decided to put her ear up to the door and give a listen. Maybe she decided to do that. Maybe she'd already heard through the lightning fast grapevine of black Philadelphia that Randolph slaves were claiming their freedom. And maybe she was wondering what it would be like for her too, to leave the only owners she had ever known. Oh, what would it be like if she left them? If Ona had been thinking about this, she and Attorney General Randolph would have been on the same wavelength. Edmund Randolph had come to the president's house to tell George and Martha not to make the same mistake he had and underestimate those dastardly slaves taking their freedom like that behind his back when he wasn't looking. Could have at least done it in front of his face. He had spent the day examining all the laws. He was legally unable to get his slaves back. The truth was, Randolph had completely misjudged the abolition laws in the northern states. Like many Southerners, including George Washington, he had told himself that the institution of slavery was actually helpful to the slaves. Yeah, that's what happens when you lie to yourself. You don't fool nobody but yourself. Enslaved men and women, they thought, were better off with a generous owner than they were because they were well fed, they were sheltered and cared for, like you do a pet dog, just take them to the dog pound and, have the nails clipped and everything, give them a little manicure, make them look real cute. You know how y'all like to do them poodles, right? Yeah. In fact, many of these same Southern white men and women would have said that they treated their slaves almost as though they were members of the family. This kind of thinking is sometimes called paternalism. A belief that an authority can protect people by giving them what they need to survive, but those people are not given any responsibility or freedom to make their own choices. With respect to slavery, the belief that the slaves should be content with their position in life was widespread among white slave owners. Widespread belief that they were treating the enslaved with privilege and special care. George and Martha certainly believed this. It seems obvious today that slavery was inhumane, but at the time it was easier for slave owners to believe they were doing the slaves a favor by clothing them and giving them shelter, rather than the slave owners trying to imagine living in the slave's shoes for even 1 second, or even living without them. Maybe they should have imagined that. What was equally absurd was that the slave owners, such as the Washingtons and Edmund Randolph, thought that the slaves were incapable of learning and understanding the laws of the land. This was part of a self-fulfilling prophecy, since the majority of slave owners did not allow slaves to learn how to read or write. It would be hard for slaves to learn and understand the laws of the land. It hadn't occurred to Randolph that in moving to Philly, his slaves would be exposed to free people who would teach them what Randolph would not. He warned Martha that she and George must pay attention to their own, to their own slaves. Those who were of the age in this family might follow this example. After a residence of 6 months should put it in their power. Ona and Christopher, Paris and Giles, Hercules and Richmond, Austin and Maul, all of them potentially could leave the Washingtons at the drop of a hat under Pennsylvania law. Martha took this very seriously. She met with Tobias Lear, George's secretary, who wrote George a letter explaining the Randolph situation. It would be a terrible thing for their own slaves to learn about the law and leave, not to mention how embarrassing for the president and his wife if their slaves turned the laws against them. Say what? Whoa. The utter gall of a slave turning the law against his slave owner? Come on now. Tobias wrote George a letter asking him for him to give directions in the matter respecting the blacks in the family. Yeah, you know what that translates to. It ain't the blacks. Tobias himself felt personally torn. Not that he would have said that to George. He was from a town in New Hampshire called Portsmouth, which was an increasingly busy shipping port in the late 18th century. As with many of the northern states, slavery existed in New Hampshire, and while slavery had not been completely outlawed, there were only about 140 slaves and 630 free blacks living there. Tobias was George's eyes and ears on the ground in Philly, and was probably a bit more realistic than Randolph or Martha about the animosity toward slavery in the northern states. It would take all of Tobias's planning and all of George's reserve to keep this powder keg of anti-slavery forces from blowing up in his face. This was even more difficult than expected. George Washington, despite his many achievements, was almost always in debt. His harvest never earned him as much money as he needed to pay off his bills. The truth was that Martha was much richer, quote unquote, than George, or at least Martha's family was. The property that George controlled after their marriage was still owned by Martha and the Custis family, the heirs of her first husband. In this case, slaves equaled property, and property equaled money. If Ona and the rest of the Washington slaves claimed their freedom in Philly, George would have been out of business, bankrupt. He'd have to pay the estate of Martha's dead husband for the value of every slave that was gone. This was a lot of money in this era, and George just didn't have it. George replied to Tobias Lear's letter very quickly. He blamed the increasingly bold abolitionists in Philadelphia for trying to wreck his lifestyle. Yeah, that's what he said. They were trying to wreck his lifestyle. Imagine that. These abolitionists made it their priority to find slaves like Ona so that they could tell them, despite his confidence that he treated his slaves well, he knew his slaves would be susceptible to the epidemic of black freedom. For although I do not think they would be benefited by the change, yet the idea of freedom might be too great a temptation for them to resist. Luckily, there was a loophole, a glaring space in the law that George and Martha believed would allow them to keep their slaves. They devised a simple and deceptive plan. George Washington, right? Yeah, ain't this the president that couldn't tell a lie, but he engages in deception? But I thought deception was the same as a lie. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe y'all just need to look that word up, deception or deceptive, either way. If enslaved people were allowed to claim freedom after 6 months, then George and Martha, with Tobias Lear's help, would make sure that none of their slaves stayed in Philly 1 second longer than the 6 months. The slaves would be shuttled to and from Mount Vernon every 6 months, avoiding the stopwatch counting down to black freedom in Pennsylvania. If it was too inconvenient to get to Virginia from Philly, a quick trip to a slave-owning state like New Jersey would serve the same purpose, because New Jersey and New York were both slave states. Keep that in mind when y'all thinking about being free in the North. The hourglass of slavery would be turned over every 6 months. The Washington's property would be safe. Technically, this was still illegal because of a 1788 amendment. Morally, it was dishonest at best. The 6-month clock existed for a reason that George chose to ignore. He must have known it was an underhanded, sneaky, devilish type practice, because he was very clear that his plan had to be secret. Shh, we keeping this on the DL, y'all. Okay? Don't tell nobody. But we leaving before 6 months is up. All y'all leaving. Yeah. He stated this plainly in his response to Tobias Lear. I wish to have it accomplished under pretext that may deceive both them and the public. This advice may be known to none but yourself and Mrs. Washington. It turns out that George Washington was just like everybody else, deeply flawed. Sometimes he was extremely decent. In this specific instance, he acted in what he thought was his own personal best interest, shuttling slaves in and out of Philadelphia before the end of a 6-month timeline that would allow basic liberty to human beings was a terrible thing for George and Martha Washington to do. Moreover, it dishonored the man who had served the country so bravely and so often at great personal risk. Yet both he and Martha had time to rectify their behavior. The question would be whether they would. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Next chapter, a 6-month clock. We're going to see how it rock all around that clock. Meanwhile, all you little children out there, I know you were enjoying that story because it gets it even more exciting than that. We just coming to the most exciting part of the whole story. So for now, I need all you little children out there to go ahead and take your little head and put it on your little pillow on your little bed. Close those your eyes and wait for that big old sun to rise. And when you feel those sunbeams beaming down on your eyes, you know then it's time for you to go ahead and rise and shine, old chillin' of mine. But in the meantime, rest easy. Be at peace, my child. Be at peace. And for you adults, y'all know what you need to do. Go ahead, give us a like, a thumbs up, and subscribe to the Tubular Black Facts channel. As I say good night to Maurice and Brother Solomon over there. We'll see y'all next time with a brand new rhyme. Remember, a lie of omission is just the same as a lie of commission. I just wanted to just throw that in at the end, since we're talking about the president that never told a lie. But somebody did. Maybe they told it for him. Maybe that's how that works. In the meanwhile, this is Doc Ock signing off. I will be black tomorrow at noon. Look for us then as we continue to bring you more stories about Juneteenth. So look for us tomorrow at noon, and we'll continue with our story about Juneteenth.